I'm Stephanie with the Sweet Sugar Baker, and today I'm going to show you how I made 3 different types of decorated sugar cookies. So we're going to be doing the lace, the embroidery, which also kind of reminds me of Wedgwood china, and knit, like yarn knitting. So for all 3 of those, we're going to be using a stiff consistency white royal icing, which I will mix up right now. So I have my my white royal icing here. This is just how it was after I mixed up the batch, and I'm going to be mixing it up into the consistency that we need for doing this. And I have my piping bags, paintbrushes. We will need a paintbrush to do the brush embroidery technique. I have my scribes for fixing anything that needs fixing. I have a little dish with water, and I have a 1/4 teaspoon measuring spoon in there. I'm going to use that for mixing up the consistency that we're going for here. I have my flexible rubber spatula for mixing the icing up. When I first started doing this, I just used spoons to mix up the icing. And let me tell you, having these little spatulas is really helpful. If you don't have one, I recommend getting them because it's just so much nicer to be able to scrape off the bottom and edges of the bowl. It's just a lot more efficient. I also have a separate bowl here that's empty that I'm going to be using for the lace, because for the lace, what you're going to do is you're going to pipe on the thick, and then you're going to mix up a batch of really thin watery that you're going to paint on with a paintbrush. So that's what I'm going to use this bowl for. I also have my my flooded sugar cookies that I made a couple weeks ago, and I froze them. I heat sealed them in bags and froze them to keep them fresh. So these have already been flooded with different colors. I have blue, green, and some pink. So this is what we're going to be using for the demonstration, is a few of these just basic round sugar cookies. Some of them are flowers with the ruffled edges, but I just did a round circle of icing on them. And I feel like that having a nice little background color really shows off these techniques nicely. And you just need a simple basic cookie. Obviously you can do these techniques on anything, and it's a really fun thing to add details to whatever cookies you happen to be working on. But to practice the techniques, I just did them on the circles, and I think they look awesome. All right, so let's get started mixing up some thick. So right now this is super thick. It's like, you can see, I mean, it's practically a solid. I don't know what to even describe this as. What is this thick? Like frosting, I guess, a very thick frosting. Maybe like a store-bought can of frosting that's just really thick when you get it out of the can, you know. When I made this, I did use clear vanilla extract and almond extract, which are both clear, so that I wouldn't change the color. So I have a really nice bright white to work with, which I think is good for the lace and the brush embroidery and the knit. But you can obviously do any of them with any color that you want. I just like how the white looks against the colored background. All right, that's probably all that we need. Honestly, it's probably more than enough, but that way we have plenty to work with. All right, so I'm going to start by adding in 1, 2, 3 of my 1/4 teaspoons of water, just because I have a pretty large amount of icing here that we're working with. So I feel like I can be sort of generous with the water. Obviously, that's one of those things you never want to add too much water to start with, because then you have to add powdered sugar if you need to get it back to a stiffer consistency again. But this is already really making the icing a much more workable consistency. It's still stiff, so when I pull it up, it's still stiff peaks. The peaks still stay there, but it's more workable since I added in a little bit of water to it. Because you do need to be able to pipe it out of the piping bag, and if it's super stiff, it won't even come out nicely and it'll strain your hands. So you have to get just that right consistency that you can squeeze it out, but it still retains all of its shape and structure. Which this may be good, because I do want it to be very stiff, so that it won't melt and lose its shape. And I feel like this might be it. So it's stiff peaks. The peaks stay. They aren't really curling over into soft peaks, but it's very close to soft peaks because some of them actually do curve over. So it's kind of right on the border between stiff peaks and moving into soft peaks, which I think will be a good consistency for what we're doing. All right, let me get a cup. If you don't do this, this is the easiest way to fill an icing bag. Stick it in a cup, and the cup does the work of holding it open for you. And it's a lot less messy that way. Okay, so let's get some icing down in there. All right, I think I might leave a little bit in the bowl to use for when I mix up my super thin paintable icing. So we'll just leave a little bit in the bowl for that. Okay, now I'm not really able to push it down because I haven't cut the tip, and so all the air is blocking it. So let's cut the tip off. And we're going to want a really tiny hole for the tip so we can have lots of control over the detail. So I cut it super small to start off with. You can always cut it bigger. It's hard to cut it smaller, right? Yes. Okay, so now, let's see if we can push this down. All right, now I'm just going to test this by squeezing a little bit out onto my napkin and see if I like the tip. Ooh. All right, I think that's just a little bit too small of a hole. So I'm going to cut it just a little bit bigger. like it. Okay, so I'm going to change my camera angle to focus on the cookie so that you can watch the decorating happen. All right, here we go. Okay, the first technique I'm going to do is the lace technique. So obviously you can do any kind of pattern that you want. This one I'm going to do is the eyelet, and I'm just going to freehand it, but you can kind of plan it out more in advance if you'd like. But I'm going to start in the middle here, and I'm going to make a little pattern. Let's see. One. Gotta hold my hand steady. It's shaking. Two. Three. 4. And then I'm going to do some of the little round circles around it. Okay, now let's do another one that's kind of connecting over on the side here. Some more circles in here. Oops. Okay, and then we'll come over on the other side and do the same thing. Nice symmetry. Okay, very nice, very nice. Okay, now I'm just going to do a little border around the edge. And then down the bottom. And then I'm going to connect these on the side just to prevent the, let's see, how do I show you here? Prevent the watered down icing from going off the cookie. Just give it a little bit of a border to contain it. So it's connected. My hand is really shaking, pushing this thick icing out of here. Okay, ta-da! All right, so now I'm going to mix up the watery icing while we let this dry a bit. And so put some icing in here. Maybe a little bit more. Now I like the way that you can get a sheer look to the lace that makes it look like real lace. So I like to make it really thin and watery so that it's just see-through on the cookie. So it's almost like a cream consistency, like a liquid half and half or something like that. A little bit thicker than milk. But still very, very watery. All right, let's try that and see how that works for us. Okay, so I have some paintbrushes here that I only use for cookies. I got them just for this, so they never have any real paint on them, which is important. And I'm going to get one that has a very small tip, so I can get some nice details in there. Now, I'm gonna get some of this and just paint it in. And you do want to make sure that it goes right up to touch the edges of your drawings so that it connects with them. And I'm just gently tapping into these tiny, tiny spaces to allow the icing to fill itself in there. So I will probably go ahead and speed up the rest of this a little bit for you so it's not as tedious to watch. So now you get the idea. Okay, there. Beautiful, beautiful. But we're not done yet. So we're gonna let this dry, and then we will come back and finish adding the rest of the details once it's dry. Okay, our next technique we're going to do, since we have our paintbrush here ready to go, is the brush embroidery. So for this one, there's two different ways you can do it. One is with lines and one is with dots. So the first one we'll do is lines, and then I'll do one with dots, and we'll see how they look. Okay, so for the lines, we're going to be doing scallops, and this is going to give kind of the flower look. So I'm going to want these on the edge, or maybe one in the middle. Let's start with one in the middle. Okay, so we're going to do let's start with that. It's kind of a little cloud shape. So what you want to do is you want your water nearby. You're going to get your paintbrush just a little bit damp, and I just kind of tap it off on the side to get the extra water. You don't want it soaking wet, just damp. And then we're going to come in here and we're just going to paint down. And I might need to add some more icing because I cut my tip really thin to do these details. I might want to add an extra layer on top to give it a little bit more thickness so that I have more to pull down. But this is the general idea here, is that you're keeping the outside shape but gently brushing down the insides of your line to get that little, oh, so pretty. Let's add another line on there just so we can get a little bit more of the brush detail. My hand is shaking so bad. Yikes. Okay. All right, so now we have a little bit more icing to work with. We can kind of pull down some of this. Get the brush a little bit damp again. All right, so that looks pretty. And then we can add another layer inside of that. And I'll go ahead and go over it twice. So for this one, it might be better to have a little bit of a larger hole that you cut out of your icing bag to get a little bit of a thicker line, but because I want to use this icing bag again for the next one, I don't know if I want to cut, I don't know. I guess yarn could have a little bit of a bigger hole, but I'm just going to keep it small for now because I like having that detail with the small line. Okay, so there's our inside flower. I'm going to wipe my brush off on my napkin, and let's do an outside flower now. And one more. Okay. Added one over on this side. that's it. That cookie is done. So pretty. Okay, now our last technique before we go back to finish off the lace is knitting. Okay, so what I did is, now when you do knitting, you're gonna do the knitting stitching, obviously, but before you do that, you need to fill in the area that's going to be knit with the same color, because otherwise you can see through the stitches and it doesn't look as pretty. So let's just do kind of a square, like a little blanket or pillow. Okay. All right, now I'm going to have to wait for that flood to dry before I can do the knitting. So why don't we go ahead and do one more, just in case we want to do another. This one we can do a little hat. And I'll do a little tassel on the top. How about that? Okay, so our lace has not completely dried yet, but we can probably come back on and add the rest of our details since it's not quite as wet. So what you want to do is you might want to go back over each of the eyelets to give it that extra look of, you know, being embroidered around each hole. So here we go. All right, so there you have it. I'm done with the lace. Now obviously it's up to you what kind of details you want to add. I could go back in and put more dots throughout, but I kind of liked the look of just the plain lace on that side. So you decorate it however you like, and that is the technique. So pretty. Now I realized I forgot I was going to show you one other version of the brush embroidery with dots. So let's try that. Okay, so same technique as before. We're just going to use dots instead of lines. So let's try it out, see what happens. Okay, so This is the dot embroidery, brush embroidery, and then this is the line brush embroidery. So very similar, but you do get a slightly different result with the two of them, which is kind of fun. So there's two different techniques for you to try for the brush embroidery. Now, let's see if we can come back to our knitting. It's crusted over, it's not completely dry, but we're gonna give it a try anyway. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a bottom line to define the rim of the hat. And then I'm just going to put some little lines on there. Okay, now we're going to do the knitting. So I'm just going to start over on the side, and to do my knitting stitch, I'm basically making like two sides of a heart or two sides of a V. So just like one dot that I draw out down, and then to the right, another dot that I draw out down, and then just continuing that left, right, left, right, left, right. And let's see what happens. Okay, and we'll just continue with our knitting, one line over. All right, and there is our little knit pillow all finished. So here's our knit hat and our knit pillow. And all of our finished cookies all together now. So now you know how to do eyelet lace, brush embroidery, lines and dots, and the yarn knitting on your cookies. Hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Thank you so much for watching. Hello again. Just wanted to pop back on and say thank you so much for watching my tutorials. I hope that it was helpful to you, and I hope that you enjoyed learning how to do some new techniques for your sugar cookie decorating. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. You can also follow me on Facebook and Instagram at The Sweet Sugar Baker. It's Facebook, The Sweet Sugar Baker, Instagram, The Sweet Sugar Baker, and YouTube, The Sweet Sugar Baker. I hope to see you again soon. Happy baking. Bye.